Okay, in this lesson, we're going to talk about solving trig equations. With two different functions. Okay, so the first one, we've got cosine x equal to secant x. So the first thing you want to do is you want to try and get the equation to where there's just one function. So you can use your identities to do this. So, you can either change, I would in this case change it to both of them to cosine. So cosine x is equal to 1 over cosine x. Now, if we go ahead and solve that, I multiply both sides by cosine x, I get cosine squared x equals 1. And if I take the square root of both sides, so cosine x is going to equal plus or minus 1. So you think about on your coordinate plane, where is cosine positive 1? So you think about cosine represents x. Well, at 0, it's 1. It's at 180, it's also negative 1. So we're going to get 0 and 180. So remember, cosine represents x. So where is cosine 1? Well, it's 1 at 0, and it's negative 1 at 180. You could also type that into your calculator. So if you did the cosine of 1, or the inverse cosine of 1, you get 0. If you do the inverse cosine of negative 1, so clear inverse cosine of negative 1, you get 180 also. So so that would be another way you could do that particular problem. But 0 and 180 are your two answers for the first one. Example 2, let's say we have sine x equals 3/4 cosecant x. So again, I'm going to change the cosecant to a sine. So sine x equals 3/4 sine x. It's actually 1 over sine x. And if I multiply both sides by sine x, I get sine squared x equals 3/4. And if I take the square root of both sides, we get sine x equals the square root of 3 over 2, and that's going to be plus and minus. So if I then do the inverse sine of radical 3 over 2, now the inverse sine of radical 3 over 2, it's going to give me 60. And if I think about all students think college, in this case we're saying that sine is both positive and negative. So we're going to be at 60 in the first quadrant, 180 minus 60 in the second quadrant, which is 120, 180 plus 60 in the third quadrant, which is 240, and the fourth quadrant, 360 minus 60, which is 300. So for this one, 4 answers: 60 degrees, 120 degrees, 240 degrees, and 300 degrees. Okay, our last example we're going to do here on this one call this example 3. We've got 2 cosine squared x plus sine x equals 2. So this is one where you're actually going to use one of your Pythagorean identities. So I'm going to change the cosine squared to a sine squared. So we know that cosine squared is the equivalent of 1 minus sine squared. Then you're going to go ahead and distribute and get rid of the parentheses. So 2 minus 2 sine squared x plus sine x equals 2. I'm going to set it all equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract a 2 to the left side. When I do that, those cancel the 2's. So negative 2 sine squared x plus sine x equals 0. Now I'm going to go ahead and factor out a sine x. So when I factor out sine x, I'm left with negative 2 sine x plus 1. So we've got sine x equals 0. And then we've got negative 2 sine x plus 1 equals 0. Well, where does y equal 0? Again, y is going to be equal to 0 at 0 and at 180 because negative 1, 0. So we get 0 and 180 there. Here I solve, I got to subtract 1, so I get negative 2 sine x equals negative 1. Divided by negative 2, so sine x is going to equal 1/2. So again, if I do my inverse sine, so it's inverse sine of 1/2, I get 30. So inverse sine of 1/2, we get 30. Now we're saying that sine is positive. Well, remember, all students think college. So sine is going to be positive in the first quadrant, so that's my 30. It's also going to be positive in the second quadrant. So 180 minus 30 gives me 150. So 30 and 150, 0 and 180 are going to be my 4 answers for this problem.